Hello and welcome to Voices of Enablement by GTM Buddy, an interview series focusing on the key issues affecting the enablement community today. It's a tough market right now, organization cutting staff, pausing investments into the go-to-marketing department. How do you make a compelling case for the value of enablement is a core question we are seeking to answer. I'm very excited for this particular podcast. This is the very first time we have two guests coming over on the show, Carly and Malvina. They are not just the revenue enablement leaders, but they are named women in making an impact in sales enablement SC Pro. And they also run a podcast called Enablement Brew. A pleasure having you on the show. I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
All right, who goes first? Carly.
Go ahead, Malvina.
So my name is Malvina, and I'm the Director of Enablement at ReachDesk, although now in the moment I'm starting actually a new opportunity, a new challenge in August. I can't give any more details, but end of August, that's when that's happening. And yeah, really excited to join you today. I'm obviously joined by Carly, who's the co-host of the Enablement Brew. And yeah, enablement is really a passion, and we love talking, and I love talking about all things enablement. So excited to join you today.
Pleasure. Carly,
hi, everyone. I'm Carly. I am a co-host of the Enablement Brew with Malvina. I'm the Senior Director of Revenue Operations and Enablement at Andela, and I've been there for 2.5 years now, running the Ops and Enablement team.
Awesome. So I think, again, right, because you speak to a lot of people, I think the viewers are going to get so much information out of this podcast. So let's just get into it. The very first question I want to ask both of you, we know it's not going great for the enablement. There are a lot of layoffs that keep happening. And I speak to a lot of enablement people. You know, enablement is seen as a cost center versus a force multiplier. So the very first question I want to ask is, how do you think we can elevate the role of sales enablement with the C-suite when many of the support functions are being cut?
Yeah, this one, Malvina and I have actually also asked this question on our podcast, and we've been lucky enough to actually have 2 C-suite members on our podcast as guests, and we asked them this question. We're like, how can we justify enablement? Like, you guys clearly know what enablement is. Like, what's your advice? And the advice that they've given, and I also agree with, is enablement has to be able to tie back the work that they're doing to showing some sort of impact on a metric that matters to the business. Now, we all know that enablement is not solely responsible for our win rate going up or average deal size going up, but enablement is definitely an influence to those metrics based on the programs that we can run. And so it's really important to know what metrics you're looking to improve and what metrics matter to the business, and show the impact that you have had on those metrics over a given period of time.
Just to add on to that, and that is absolutely like the most perfect response. I don't think I could have answered that in any other way. I think we're all on this mission of finding, how do you really defend enablement and really be able to link it up to the business goals, the business strategy, what the outcomes should be, to really show one that the alignment is there, and also to obviously highlight and show what the impact is. And I think so often enablement is maybe in a very tricky situation where, let's face it, we aren't communicating internally. A lot is happening, but no one is really talking to each other. No one knows, I didn't know you're working on that. Oh, I didn't know enablement is helping out with that. Oh, we didn't know that you guys have this as a side project. And I've seen this happen a lot of times as well, where, everyone is working towards that common good. Everyone has that metric in mind, but at the end of the day, no one talks to each other internally. And when they do have those conversations, it's often too late, right? We had so many people go off in different directions and potentially work on the same project. So I think the first thing that is really fundamental and extremely important is to make sure that internal communication happens. Be aware of what others are working on, have the conversations with the executive team, ask them, find out, be involved in the conversations of what's important to them, where the focus is. If you don't know where the focus is, if you don't know where the business is struggling this quarter or this month, that's a big problem, right? Yeah. So it all starts with that internal communication first and foremost.
Yeah. So I think, just to summarize, nobody's giving money until we are helping, a company grow the revenue, or in terms of maybe cutting the cost. And I think in a time like this, it's very important to tie all the work that you do to the revenue outcomes. So I think alignment on that, what you spoke about, Carly, is very important. And second is also to communicate. Like, it's not that people are just working in silos, or maybe two people are working on the same thing, making sure that everybody's on the same page and that, okay, this is the goal that we are working on. These are the actions that we are taking to achieve that goal. So that is where the second question we get asked a lot from a lot of practitioners. What kind of metrics do you think, right? Like enablement, you said, right, enablement is not doing the selling themselves. So what kind of metrics that enablement can align with their C-suite, or what kind of goals that they can talk to, which where we can show, okay, this is the impact or this is the influence that we have via our efforts?
Yeah. I think every single business wants to generate more revenue, wants to increase their average order value, wants to improve their win rate, wants to win against competition. I think really where it all starts is really looking closely at your entire sales process, looking at what that journey looks like, what is happening at every single stage, ultimately to know where the effort and the focus should be, right? And if we notice, or if we take, for example, win rate, and we know that we have to improve it, maybe it's suffering this quarter, it's been suffering consistently over the past few quarters, then really, for me, what it comes down to is really doing an analysis as to why. Okay, so why aren't we winning those deals? Why are we losing? Are we losing against competition? Are we losing because we don't have the right functionality or features in place? Are we losing because we're getting ghosted, right? No one is coming back to us. Are we losing because maybe we're pushing a lot of these deals through to proposal too quickly, when actually the buyer isn't yet ready to see that proposal? Internally, we often talk about, we're only showing a proposal or delivering a proposal once I've heard verbally from you that, yes, we are your chosen provider and you want to go ahead with us. But we all know for sellers, it's very easy to put that deal into proposal when it's not necessarily there. So if you look at something like win rate, there's so many different elements that go into that. But once you analyze and you're like, okay, we know that our win rate is suffering. We're losing a lot to competition. We're losing on the back of functionality that we have, but maybe our sellers aren't comfortable to articulate. Well, that's where enablement can come in, to really ensure that sellers understand what the value proposition is, know how to articulate the strengths, the benefits, and really link them to the pains and the challenges of the customer. So that's where I would begin.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, because we can talk about like the metrics all day long. Like any metric that is important to a revenue organization should be important to an enablement team. But especially right now in like the economic environment we're in, a lot of leadership teams are asking themselves, why is pipeline so low? Or like, why aren't we winning as much? And there's the question of like, why? And enablement, like Malvina said, is so well positioned, especially if you have a strong tech stack, to be able to tell leadership why things are happening, or at least be able to provide some insights into why it's potentially happening. And that's a capability that not a lot of revenue teams will have if they don't have enablement, to actually dedicate the time to dig into the call recordings and figure out, okay, this deal, here's all of our lost deals from the last quarter. Let's go in and let's find the points where we didn't win that objection, or we didn't really speak well against our competitors, or, XYZ. And so I think it's super important to be able to do that. But my other response to people asking well, what metrics should enablement care about? Like I said, all of them, but you need to define that metric, or ask your leadership team when they say, hey, here's a project for you. You need to say, what metric are we looking to improve? That's the first question you should ask. That's like your qualification question, back to the team. I always kind of say enablement is also in sales. We have to qualify opportunities. And so you say, what metric are we looking to improve? And if they don't have an answer, then you probably shouldn't work on it. Siobhan Thatcher, she was at Ring Central. I think she's at Slack now. She's a guru of enablement. She always says, if you can't measure it, then we shouldn't work on it. And I wholeheartedly agree with that statement.
Yeah, I think great point, because a lot of the enablement people, they, it starts with analyzing, okay, what is the problem that they're trying to solve, and, make them say, okay, this is a problem that we want to see, because they will have a metric to it. If they're not able to quantify that, maybe it's not worth your time to, to do that. And I read it about somewhere, it's called the situational program, learning program, because you identify a problem, like Malvina saying that, win ratio is decreasing. Maybe a rep is doing a bad job in terms of negotiation or discovery. And that's where your entire enablement program or that initiative will be all about. How can we help sales reps discover more? Because that is the only way you can solve that problem. And then we can, work on the metric that we agree to. Yeah. The second question I have is on this enablement initiatives. Once we identify this is a problem, I think a lot of enablement people, they say, okay, the role of frontline sales managers plays a big role, especially when you have to launch these situation learning programs once we identify a problem. So can you talk to us more on how do you sell them internally, or how do you lean on the frontline sales managers to make sure these programs are well adopted and you get the outcome that you desire?
The one thing that really frustrates me is when there is a challenge or a problem internally, and somehow it's like, oh, enablement, here you go. This is what we need to fix. It almost gets thrown over the wall, and it becomes an enablement problem. And I really think that's so wrong to think that way, because if we take, for example, the BDRs, right? If we're trying to improve their reply rates, or if we're looking at something like cadencing, right? And maybe we're doing cadences, that responsibility isn't on the enablement team 100%. My knowledge of what a good cadence looks like, okay, it's there. Am I an expert in it? By no means, right? And I think this is where sometimes enablement is seen as the expert in everything. We can't be the expert in everything. We can give guidance on everything within the revenue organization, but we're not experts. And that's where that close collaboration with the rest of the team really comes in. If anything is to work and really to become a success, everyone has to be fully vested and know the role that they're playing. Now, unless you're a sales team where you're consistently hitting target month over month, quarter over quarter, okay, I'll leave you to it. But if that's not the case, then you should definitely be working with enablement to improve, right? Because if you're a sales leader or a sales manager, your success is based on the success of your team. So if your team isn't successful, you want to understand, well, why aren't they hitting their targets? Why are they struggling this month or this quarter? And what can we do together to help them? It's not just a session with enablement, or it's not, oh, well, they'll go through these 3 training programs and they'll be fine. Absolutely not, because we know that you might do a training, you might do a course, you might retain some of the knowledge, but a lot of it gets forgotten unless it's constantly being used. And that's really where leadership managers come in, right? They need to make sure that whatever is being learned is actually being utilized, that we're using the same language in all of the conversations, and that they're really showing what can be done and leading by example. It's difficult for sellers who potentially attend a course or do some sort of lesson or take part in a session that enablement is rolling out, but then the attitude that they see from their manager is, we don't really care. Oh, great, wonderful, you're back. What message does that send to the seller? Oh, well, my manager doesn't care about it, so clearly I shouldn't care about it because it's not important. And that is oftentimes a battle that enablement has to fight. It is important. And if you can't see that, that's the first thing that's the problem.
Yeah, I would say before you even embark on bringing a training in, if you're bringing something external or you're going to launch a training, have a touch base with the management team and share like, hey, this is the problem I've identified. Is this a problem that you guys see as well? And if they're like, oh yeah, like, great. Is it important that we solve this problem together? Like, yes, definitely. You kind of get them to say, again, Socratic selling here. You get them to say, like, this is a problem. I need to fix it. Here's the impact of us not solving that problem. We're going to have, less than half of our team hitting quota, or, whatever, we're going to miss our numbers, all of these things. So then they kind of realize we have to solve this problem. Say, all right, am I going to have your support when we come up with a plan together that's going to solve this problem? And if they say, yes, of course, then you point back to that when it's time to release the program. One thing that my team and I do that I really like is every other week, I have a meeting with the frontline managers. Like, as a group, I have like sales frontline managers and our account management frontline managers together. We kind of just talk about, hey, like, what are the problems we're seeing, kind of brainstorm ideas, run by or preview training with them that's coming, so that they feel like they are in the know well in advance. And so that we know that we'll at least have their support. And if they don't have, like, if we don't have their support, we can point back to those meetings and say, hey, like, where did we go wrong here? But I think it's really important to like bring managers along in the process, because otherwise, you're right, Malvina, it turns into like managers just send their reps over to enablement as if they're like going to training as like a boot camp, and it's just like a just in time sort of thing. And then they come back and like they're ready to go. It's just not the way it works. So I always encourage like bringing managers along, but also getting them to like recognize that something needs to change and that they are really responsible for helping ensure that changes.
Yeah. And I think unless the frontline sales manager themselves is not motivating or, telling the benefits of this, sales will always look at it as a chore to do. They will not value it as much. And then, as a result, we know the outcome will not be there. And I think it's to the point which you just said, always analyze, tell them, okay, if we don't do this right now, this will happen. And it also holds true for if the company is doing great or they are doing numbers, it might be an external pressure that the customers do need the product. And even if the salespeople lack competency, they're still able to sell. That is where you can proactively go that, hey, this is where we are lacking. Today we are doing better, like you said. And then if tomorrow, if we don't improve this one, if we don't drive this behavioral change, the next quarter, probably the next quarter will not hit numbers because we lack in this competency.
Yeah. And leading by example is so important. I mean, I remember when I started my career, a lot of the habits and things that I picked up along the way, I really learned a lot by looking, right? And I looked at people who were, more senior, who've been in the company for a long time, what are they doing? And a lot of it really is, you're learning by example. You're seeing what others are doing around you. You're seeing how your manager acts, behaves, communicates. And that's why I think it's so important for managers, for leaderships, really to be using the language, to be using the vocabulary, to be referencing back to the, to the trainings, to the teachings, because that's how you get your team to buy in. They see that you're bought in. It's not just something for them, it's for all of us, collectively, and we're all using and applying it. And I feel like sometimes we underestimate the importance of that, but it's important.
Yeah. No, I used to work at LinkedIn, and I remember the frontline sales managers were bought into the idea of enablement. And my manager used to always say, based on the reps, that, hey, if you don't do this, you will not make more money. Again, every seller must be, would have been motivated by different things. Or he'll say, oh, you will not get promoted to an enterprise account executive if you don't do this. So I think if the same kind of value is coming from the wording is coming from the manager, and obviously it's not to that, okay, if you do this, you have to do this. But again, talking about the broader strategic value of enablement, I think this will go smoother rather than enablement running behind salespeople to any adopt their initiatives.
Yeah.
One other point on the Malvina that you just spoke about. Again, onboarding alone is not enough. There's a forgetting curve. People forget the information, and I think in a time like this, companies are not investing a lot. A lot of the enablement teams that I speak to in India, it's a very nascent function, right? People still think of enablement as just training, which it is not. So what do you think? What kind of value can enablement provide when you're not hiring a lot of reps today? What kind of value can you provide to tenured reps? Can you talk to us a little more on that?
Yeah. So like we've been saying, all of the things that we've been using as examples, like win rate, increasing your win rate, increasing the number of opportunities in your pipeline, all of those metrics that we can look to improve have nothing to do with onboarding. And so even if you're not hiring right now, enablement should look at the various levers in the sales velocity equation and do some analysis and figure out, like, is this where we want this to be? If you're a mature sales organization, chances are you do have a target of what you want your win rate to be. And so look at where it is now and where you want it to be. And what does that mean? Like, how many more deals per quarter do you have to win if you have the same number of deals? And then how are you going to do that? And so all of that, and that has really nothing to do with training. That's a lot of like analysis, finding trends and insights, and a lot of interviewing reps. There's a lot of like background work that goes into that. And sure, a solution to that might be training. It might be process improvement. It might be like reinforcement of the existing process. There might be a lot of different ways to solve for that, but definitely enablement falls into the trap of, oh, we have new hires, they're going to onboard them, and that's their job. And now that we don't have any new hires, like, we don't need enablement anymore. Like, false. It's completely false. So that's where I really like recommend enablement kind of go back, look at the metrics or the goals of the revenue team, of the overall organization, and then figure out, like, do we even have a chance to hit these numbers if things stayed the same today? The answer is probably no. So what needs to happen in order to hit those numbers? And that's where enablement should be like screaming from the rooftops, like, hey, this is how we can help do those things. Because chances are your CRO isn't thinking like, oh, enablement's going to help me improve my win rate. They might be if they're like a pretty mature CRO that's worked with really mature enablement organizations, but a lot of times a CRO doesn't think like that. And that's like not their fault. They just haven't had enablement partners in the past to help them think that way. So that's where enablement leaders need to be really proactive, raise their hands and be like, this is where enablement is going to help. And yes, we are not hiring right now. So this is what we should work on instead. And you have to be really like proactive and most aggressive about it, I think.
Yeah. Malvina, do you have anything to add?
Carly, you always say it so perfectly. I'm like, I wish I could say it like that. No, absolutely. Right. And oftentimes we think about enablement and we think about onboarding. That's great. Right. But onboarding happens once and you can say that it's everboarding, right? It's continuously working on how do you improve the skill set and how do you improve win rates and just how do you improve the process as a whole. But let's not also talk about the reps that maybe have joined the company 2, 3, 4 years ago, right? They're around. What kind of support are they also receiving? How are we actively working with them? So I would say onboarding, yes, great, wonderful. It's just a small little fraction, but ultimately it's, the wheels are, it's like the car, right? The car is driving, you're speeding down the highway, but you're going to have to make changes. You're going to have to change the oil. Maybe you're going to have to change the wheel while the car is moving. And really that's what enablement does. It's like, how can we go faster? How can we be better? How can we be more efficient? But the car is already on its road. It's already going to its final destination. So I would say if you have new joiners coming into the company, obviously, the focus maybe changes because you are looking at them. You want to make sure that they're happy, that they have this incredible experience, that they're joining, that they are learning, they are grasping the information. But at the same time, really, if you're working very closely and as we said earlier, communicating with the business, it's what do we do to continue getting better and better and better each time?
Yeah, man. And I think the later part is the tougher one, right? On a moving car, like you said, when new joiners come in, you have the set onboarding program. They'll do it, but I think training and onboarding an already tenured rep, you have to identify, okay, what are the things that you can focus on, or where do you think they will lack something, be it on the competency, and then releasing a program, and then get their buy-in to do this particular thing. Because by the time they're 2 years, 3 years into the system, they feel okay, they know everything. So get their buy-in to do that. I think that is the tougher part.
Yeah. And it never stops, right? I think I had this conversation with Carly, sometimes when there's so many things going on and you want to improve and you're thinking about efficiency, sometimes I say this, I'm like, I just wish we could just shut down for 2 weeks, like fix all these things and then resume, right? Like that's in an ideal world, that's never going to happen. So all of us, we're always multitasking and really trying to prioritize and making all of these changes while the car is moving. I think that's just the nature of, of the job.
Yeah. One other question I have is, Malvina, again, we have identified the problem, we released the programs. I think we already spoke about that. How do you lean on the frontline sales managers to drive the adoption of these initiatives? A lot of customers, enablement people that I speak to, this is one of the challenges that they speak about, that hey, we are just not getting the adoption of the enablement initiatives, it could be for various reasons. Maybe they do not align with the frontline sales managers or the leadership in terms of, okay, what is something that we're trying to achieve. Can you talk to us more on, how else can they drive the adoption of these initiatives, besides leaning on the frontline sales manager, or maybe aligning on the goals, in the very beginning?
Yeah. So I think we touched upon this already, but one thing that I will say is I don't think there isn't a single enablement leader out there that can say every single initiative that we've rolled out has always been a success and adoption has been 100%. I mean, if you exist and you're out there, please let us know.
Yeah, let us know. Hello.
I haven't met a single one.
Yeah. Let us know who you are. We want to chat with you, but it just doesn't happen, right? There's always going to be initiatives that maybe haven't worked out. Maybe you haven't had 100% adoption. One thing that I've learned, you may think that something sounds basic. You may think that something sounds simple. You might think that something is, well, it's quite obvious what this does, isn't it? Well, it's quite obvious how this works. Well, it's self-explanatory. And I've been in meetings and I've been guilty of this as well, where I've taken that approach. Well, this is self-explanatory. It's just logical, right? This shouldn't be a big change. Yeah. You finish the meeting and you realize, my gosh, by the amount of Slack questions or the types of questions that I'm being asked afterwards, I realized, okay, we really need to go back to basics and almost explain things really with baby steps. That's the first thing. Never assume that something is simple. Really always treat everything as a blank canvas. And even if to you it sounds basic, don't assume that it is basic for everyone else in the audience. Yeah. The other thing that I would say is repetition. If you're doing a launch, potentially it's a new tool, or it's an initiative, or it's a process. doing a one-off training session on Zoom is not going to fix the problem, right? Obviously, you spoke about the support of managers. Awesome, that has to be there. But from an enablement perspective, you really have to do repetition. You have to do it a few times. You have to bring examples, show how it applies to their day-to-day, make sure you make it tangible so they can see, okay, now I get it. I understand how I would be using this. Oh, okay, in this example, when this customer asks me this is what I would, okay, I get it. And really the power of repetition for me and not assuming, I think is my number one approach. Any kind of initiative, I always have that in the back of the mind, because where things have gone wrong is when I have assumed that people know. And when I thought, okay, look, this is quite simple, 45 minutes, one Zoom session, it's going to cut it. It never does.
Yeah. Carly's laughing. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I would say make learning fun. Like any sort of rollout, like even if it's something pretty mundane, like if you can figure out a way to make it interesting, break up the norm, put some fun gifts in your presentation, like literally do anything that's going to just change the course of the day for a salesperson, I think could be really helpful. If you have a budget for giving out prizes, do that. Like we have a recognition platform at Andela, and so we've actually included in our budget like loading up on points in the recognition platform, and we can like dish them out for anything and everything. But I use it a lot for enablement programs. If someone speaks up and like volunteers an answer in a training, I send them points, like things like that. Like you reward the behaviors that you want, right? And so that can really help with adoption. And also using different methods of learning is really important. So a 45-minute like plenary Zoom is just not going to cut it, like Malvina said. So halfway through, you should do some sort of activity, break it out into a breakout room and do like a Jeopardy game is something that we're going to do for one of our upcoming trainings, or like a bingo, or do like a Kahoot like quiz thing, or whatever. So anything that you can do to make it interesting to actually like learn, it will really help with adoption, I think, because it, like I said, it kind of like changes things up. It like breaks the mold. People just think they're going to show up to a 45-minute Zoom and not have to pay attention, but they should pay attention, and we're going to make it fun so that they do so, basically.
No, I think I totally agree with that, because I remember like the enablement people always used to come up with some spiff, or if you speak about that this is a deal that you won because of this program or this initiative, obviously that has to be there. We'll release an weekly bi-weekly letter where we'll talk about your and some seller love recognition. So I think can we lean on can we lean on that? I remember, like, I know I'm just going off, LinkedIn used to have every new joiner, they used to have a shark program. They used to, at the end of the 5-day training, they used to give a shark. And people used to prepare for weeks to get those sharks. So the enablement doesn't really have to do any, running behind them to drive this, because everybody wanted to have that shark on their desk. So if the other people are coming, they see the shark, they know they have done well. So I think something like that will obviously, self-motivate them to do better.
We're all kids at heart. Who doesn't love a prize? I love a prize.
Yeah, absolutely. We just need to know what price do they like. And that's where I think frontline sales managers are great at and can lean on that. Sure. Yeah. Awesome, Carly and Malvina. I think that brings us to the end of the show. It was such an insightful session and such a fun session. I'm sure a lot of other enablement leaders will find it useful. Thank you so much for doing it. And I look forward to connecting with you. You keep doing a lot of podcasts. I was a fan anyway. So keep all.
Amazing.
Thank you. This is great.
Yeah. All right. Bye.